and I'm not proud of any of what I'm about to say. In fact, I live with the pain of this every day, as do the people that got hurt along the way. Um, but in short, in the early 80s, I was very curious about my own sexuality. It wasn't a period of time where it was okay to speak up about that, and be honest, for fear of retribution, ostracization. Is that the right word? Being ostracized.
Of course.
um, or any of that, I mean, all of that. Or actually, the other fear was that my mum probably at the time would have been so proud of it. She'd have shouted it from the rooftops. And, in 1982, 83, that's the last thing, a teenage boy would have wanted. Now is very different, of course, but back then, never in a million years.
Stephen, tell us at what stage in your life did you find yourself? What relationship broke you to discover yourself?
Oh wow. At what stage in life did I find myself? About 18 months ago, if I'm honest. Um,
Oh,
so when I say that, I mean I was what, 55 at the time. Um, so my journey throughout life has been one of trying to discover myself and work out who I am and what I'm about, and what life really has in store and all of that. Um, Rather shamedly caused a marriage breakup and a family breakup in the process, which I'm not very 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 unhappy about, if I'm honest. So yeah, so I would say, yeah, from about 18 months or so ago. So post pandemic, about a year or so after that.
okay. So, what was your relationship like with your parents and your siblings?
Um, I think testing would be the word I would use. My parents were very young when they had me. My mum was only 17. My dad was 19. It was the late 60s. They didn't have any money, didn't have any resources. So they lived with my mum's parents. So up until I was about 6, I grew up in a house that was basically full of dysfunctional adults. Um, it was a family that was very dysfunctional. My nan and my granddad didn't have a relationship, although they still shared the same roof. Didn't share the same bedroom. My aunt, I think we would now recognize as having special needs, special educational needs. And an uncle who was only about 7 or 8 years older than me. So, was quite sort of jealous that there was this baby around suddenly and young child around, and we just didn't get on at all. And of course, my parents, who were still children themselves, really were trying to navigate that. And then along came my sister and my brother, and hopefully things started to settle down a little bit by then. But as we grew older, we were very close, and then things happened, and we sort of drifted apart. So
And
yeah,
what,
testing, I think, would be the right word to put that.
yeah. Okay, so let's keep moving along here. So you went to school. Did you make friends easily in school, or did you lose friends just as easily?
Do you know what? It's interesting. I don't think I did make friends that easily. I did. I was very much a loner, and I would make friends with certain people, but the kind of marginalized kids. So I was quite a chubby child. So the other chubby children, I would make friends with. Or I remember, I mean, we moved to out of London actually when I was about 10, and we moved to a very rural town. And I made friends with some of the kids in the school that, as I say, were the marginalized ones, which in the late 70s, early 80s, I hate to say it, but in a rural town were the two black kids in the school, for example, or children from a foreign background, or the other chubby kids or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it was, but yeah, I seem to, you're drawn to people who are similar to you, aren't you? I guess.
Yeah.
But one thing I did do was I developed fairly early on the sense that my sense of humor was going to be quite a good survival mechanism. And it would be the thing that would enable me to, make people laugh. So when the bullies would come calling, I would sort of turn the tables on them and crack a few jokes, and perhaps, some of that was at other people's expense as well. And of course that stopped me getting my head kicked in most days.
And did you find moving out from the big city of London to a small rural town that, effectively you were treated as being an outsider for quite a while within the community that you moved to?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think now because of work and what I've done, there's probably a sense of a London accent with me, but it's not as strong as members of my family who went in the opposite direction, and went off into sort of the closer areas of London. And I'm very, very, very aware, and in fact, I used to get pulled up on it at times, that my London accent as a kid and as a teenager, really did make me stand out as soon as I started talking. And in it, and I remember we did a speech day towards the end of my school time, and I was picked to do a speech, and one of the teachers actually gave me elocution lessons because my London accent meant that I pronounced things like, the word Aylesbury, which was where I lived. It's a small town in Buckinghamshire, and I pronounced it Aylesbury. So I remember him spending about an hour trying to convince me of the right way to pronounce Aylesbury.
All right, yeah.
Can you still tell my London accent, John? I suppose
Yeah.
compared to
I
yours, it's
I do remember when I moved to London first, I had to get my uh, mouth around Marylebone. It just took me a while to
oh
get.
Marylebone, yeah,
There's no
yeah,
Y pronunciation. It's just yeah. And there's other roads in London, of course, where I think it's like I can't remember the name of the road now, but you don't pronounce it as it's spelled. There's a certain pronunciation for it, and it's not as if you read it out. That would be the incorrect pronunciation, So it took me a while to get around
yeah.
Marlborough.
I've got the utmost respect for anyone from another country who's learning English as a foreign language. I mean, we're lucky we're brought up with it, but if you're learning it, and as you say, a lot of these pronunciations and different ways of saying things, it must be mind-boggling.
And of course, you have Euston Station in Dublin, and you have Euston Station in London, which is spelt without the H. It's
Yeah,
Euston. So
yeah.
yeah. So did you go to university before you went into the workplace?
No, I didn't actually. I think because my family situation was such that it was, I wouldn't say it was deprived, but we didn't have anything. I mean, my parents, worked really hard, but we never had any money, never had any of the nice trappings of things. And, it was the early 80s, and it was all about having all of the material stuff, back then. And I got halfway through my A levels and went, no, this isn't for me. Left education and went and got a job in retail originally, to begin with. And after about 6 months, that wasn't working because I was traveling quite a bit. And that's when I ended up in the automotive industry, selling cars.
Good man.
So I worked in a small dealership, on the used side of things, and used to sell about, I don't know, 10 or 11 used cars a month. So yeah, that's University of Life, John. That's where I ended up.
Man, it's like that. There's a couple of programs in Sky TV, of course, where they have these guys who are into wheeler dealers. The man Mike, he's a great character, I think, and he started out in that industry like yourself, selling secondhand cars. He's quite a character, I think.
Who's that, Mike Brewer?
Mike Brewer, yeah.
Yeah, I know Mike. I had a lunch with him. Well, probably a couple of months ago now, actually, at an event. He was the key speaker, and he was sat on the same table as me. So
Yeah.
yeah, he's a great guy, actually. Yeah.
His knowledge of cars is second to none.
There are, despite the impression and the rumors and the what's the word, the image that the industry has, there actually are some really, really fantastic people in the automotive industry, and we do often get a bad rep. Sometimes well deserved, but quite often not.
So, you got started in the car industry as a car salesman, and
Yeah.
how did you progress from there?
Career wise, I stepped out of the car industry for a year or so, and then stepped back in it. I'd done some debt collection work. That was character building. And then stepped back into the car industry because a company called GMAC, which was actually Vauxhall Motors' own finance company. GMAC stands for General Motors Acceptance Corporation. So big American finance company with an office in the UK. They were looking for debt collecting people. So I joined them. So I was back in the car industry then, but sort of indirectly. And after a year, they promoted me and I became an area manager. So I was working directly with car dealers now, helping them improve their performance. And that's really then been the theme of everything I've done ever since. So from there, I went into training roles, went to Volkswagen, and spent a number of years there. And then when I came out of that, set up my own business, doing mostly. I was trying to say about 3 different words there, but mostly doing sales training, management training, that sort of stuff across the automotive industry. And then during the pandemic, when everything collapsed, that business was pretty much wiped out. There was a few other things going on for me as well, and that's where the breakup of the marriage and the family happened. And then towards the back end of the pandemic, I created Menable, which is the business that know me for, John, and other people know me for, which is mental health support for masculine environments.
And I know from my own experience, I worked for a short while in the car industry. It was more around the whole area of component manufacturing. So we would be a second or third tier supplier into the likes of Vauxhall in Luton or, Opel, so on and so forth in Europe. And it was quite an aggressive industry, to say the least, very results driven. And there's the capacity, of course, in car manufacturing to generate huge losses because there's vast overcapacity in terms of supply. So there's always the need for people to get out there and aggressively sell cars to clients. It is a very results driven industry. And I think it's an industry with a high staff turnover, to be quite honest. So for you to stick it out for so long is a great something to have great pride in for yourself. And to
Well,
look
thank you. Yeah, it's an industry that I have over the years found a few times where I've thought it's very easy to fall out of love with this industry. But then for whatever reason you get drawn back in because obviously then really, there's lots of talk, certainly in our circles, about niching and specializing. And when I do that, I realize, well, I literally understand the car industry inside out. I do it in my sleep kind of thing. What I'm doing now is taking the learning from that industry and that, as you say, very aggressive, masculine, target driven business and sharing that learning with other businesses that are similar. So recruitment, construction, estate agency, any of those kind of industries where there's a target or performance element. Because I think quite like the car industry, if you have a sector that's geared up for mass production, whether that's first, second or third tier or whatever, if it's geared up for mass production, as you rightly say, you're going to have people in there that are target driven, and are working to a set of objectives because those products have got to find themselves out in the market somewhere.
True, true. You just mentioned there a couple of times about your family setup. So would you like to elaborate on behalf of the audience what led to the breakup of your marriage and the relationship with your family?
Yeah, this is the tricky one, and it does go right the way back to childhood and teenage years. And I'm not proud of any of what I'm about to say. In fact, I live with the pain of this every day, as do the people that got hurt along the way. But in short, in the early 80s, I was very curious about my own sexuality. It wasn't a period of time where it was okay to speak up about that, and be honest, for fear of retribution, ostracization, is that the right word? Being ostracized.
Of course.
um, or any of that, I mean, all of that. Or actually, the other fear was that my mum probably at the time would have been so proud of it, she'd have shouted it from the rooftops. And, in 1982, 83, that's the last thing, a teenage boy would have wanted. Now it's very different, of course, but back then, never in a million years. And because it was a curiosity rather than a one side of the fence or the other, I honestly did convince myself that there was something wrong with me, or that it was just a fad or a passing phase, or just a sort of natural thing of growing up. And so I found the prettiest, loveliest girl in the village, in this rural town that I was working in. And we got into a relationship, we got engaged, we got married, we had children. We were very young when we had children as well, only in our early 20s. And of course, that was fine to keep a lid on what was really going on for me. But combined with what we were just saying about the aggressive performance nature of the business I was working in, the stress levels and the anxiety, and possibly even elements of depression, would creep up on me, very, very quickly and very harshly. And it almost became that the sexuality side of it was my sort of release mechanism. So I ended up, unfortunately, succumbing to doing some things that I shouldn't have done. And as a result, when I finally was able to admit that to my now ex-wife, yeah, that was the end of that. And it took us down a very difficult, dark period of time that caused friends and family to feel that they needed to pick a side or take a view. And here's where we are. So that was a key contributor to the whole start of Men Able, and where I'm at now, if you like.
Of course. And do you still keep contact with your children, may I ask?
I I do, but they are still processing it and navigating it. And yeah, as it stands at the moment, there won't be probably much communication coming back the other way. So that's tough.
How do you feel
that's
about
tough.
that as a person in your own right?
Oh, I hate it. I absolutely hate it, and that's what I live with. Every single day. And one of the talks, I don't know if you've heard me do this talk, but one of my talks that I do is called Stand Well Back. Because when this was all erupting at the beginning of 2020, just before the pandemic hit, I was actually standing on a railway platform, and the announcer said, stand well back, because the next train at platform 4 doesn't stop here. And it was a mainline station, so the trains rattle through there at 100 mile an hour. And it did, the thought popped into my head that, 2 steps forward and this is all over. And I'm still very aware and very empathic now of anyone who sort of says, wow, yeah, that resonates, because that's, I've had those thoughts or those feelings, or knows people who have, or people who have successfully done what you thought about doing. And the reason that that's relevant is because the way I frame this now is that I live with the pain of what happened and my sort of coming out and the effect that had on other people. I live with that all the time. And that's not to say woe is me, because people would say, well, you deserve it. But I wake up with that. I go to bed thinking about it. I think about it many times during the day, think about it when I'm talking to people about it. And I would prefer it to not be the case, and my family and friends know that. But for me, in a way, that's better that I live with that pain than I'd left them with the pain of not knowing what the hell was going on that caused me to jump in front of a train or do anything else.
Did you seek any professional help or counseling to help you to overcome?
Well, yes. And this was another reason why Men Able was started, because I found that, when contacting the doctors, I mean, I actually ended up speaking to a doctor who was amazing. She was really good. She would ring me every day for an hour or so. How she managed to find time in her day, I don't know. But eventually those conversations got to, you need to get in front of some specialist help. And I'm not going to criticize the NHS or, the way that works, but quite frankly, the the first line of counseling support that I had was CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is sort of talking therapies. And all that I found that was doing was it was 6 sessions. And it was made very clear to me at the beginning, you've got 6 sessions. If you need more after that, you have to go back to your doctor and get re-prescribed. And all I was doing was literally going in every week and just talking through the same subject again and again and again. And it really wasn't getting me anywhere. So that was a prompt for me starting MenAble, because I thought, well, when somebody does have a crisis and they reach out, if that's one, a very slow, laborious process, and two, that's the output, I thought, no, we can certainly do better than that. But the main therapy I had was a friend of mine is a hypnotherapist, and she's brilliant. And we had we had many conversations, but then we had a main session of timeline therapy where she kind of hypnotized me into this trance-like state. All the emotions came out during that, and it took me right the way back to knowing that actually all of this kicked off when I was about 5 or 6, and having really strong feelings of abandonment and rejection. And then that just set the tone for the rest of my life, really. So she achieved in one session what the NHS counsellor couldn't achieve in 6. So if that says anything for where you should go.
Of course. A couple more questions here for you, Stephen. Yeah. Looking back at your past, what circumstances would you consider as character building blocks that shaped you, who you became today?
Oh wow, many of them actually. I mean, I suppose it kind of in order. My parents had some real tough marital issues when I was a teenager. So I was left to pretty much look after my siblings, who were quite a bit younger than me. So that was character building. That got me really thinking, I've got, quite a good way of, being in terms of looking after other people. Clearly, I mean, getting married, having a relationship, a strong relationship in that regard, having children of my own, you can't get much more character building than that. All the experiences that go with that, all the various bits and pieces that come with raising a family. I do know through the hypnotherapy that there were some traumatic events that I witnessed. And I mean, it's not a thought that I even had in my mind, every day. I didn't sort of go around thinking, oh yeah, I'm like this because of that happening. But the hypnotherapy dug up what would be some PTSD issues, if I'm honest. But I reframe those and look at those as actually, that's the sort of stuff that does build your character. It can drag you down and make you feel bad, but it's also character building. Like I said, doing debt collection as well, that from a career point of view, knocking on someone's door and asking for money when they're not in a good place, that was that was character building. Especially some of the responses that you'd get late at night when you're knocking on a door in a dark street. Things like that. And then obviously latterly, the whole coming out process and creating MenAble and getting the support that I've got from the industry, all of those things have combined to I would say sort of create the character that's on a journey now.
And one final question here for you, Stephen. Name one relationship you'd like to have again, given another chance, and what would you do better this time around?
Oh wow, blimey. Well, I think the first one that comes to mind, I mean, clearly there's, some navigation still going on with, my own family, but I think where I would answer that is that a relationship I would love to have again would be with my mum. She died when she was 52, so that was 22 years ago. Um, and she had leukemia, and she was, really ill, and then got better, and then went downhill very quickly. And I would love to have that relationship again, because it intrigues me to wonder how she would be now, knowing, if she knew what I was about now, sort of thing.
Of course.
And it's also it intrigues me to wonder what she actually would have said if I'd properly been honest with her when I was sort of 14 or 15. Would she have ostracized me? Would she have kicked me out? Would she have disowned me? Would she have plastered it on the walls and told everyone in the town? I just don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Of course.
So yeah, that would be a relationship I would love to have again.
Yeah, this has been a very interesting conversation to have today with you, Stephen. And what I'd say to people out there is, having worked in the car manufacturing industry myself, like yourself, is no matter how much pressure there is on us in life, you have to look after your mental and physical well-being, because otherwise you allow people to take ownership of your life, you allow stress to build up inside you, and it all erupts eventually. You're no good to anybody, not even yourself, when you become burnt out and stressed out. So I think looking after your mental and physical well-being is so important. That's the main message I take from today's conversation. And also, secondly, if you're doubting your sexuality, go and speak to somebody in private. Don't be afraid to get advice, get help. There's never a wrong answer or a wrong question in the first place. So I think seek help, seek advice is what I say to people in that regard also. So on that note, I'll bring today's conversation to a close. Thank you, Stephen.
I was 13 years old when I was gang raped by two men. And very much on that night, I left my body. It felt like I was never present within my body for many, many years. I was just this, like I was renting an empty house that had no furniture in. So I always felt like an empty vessel. So my healing has always been about getting back in and connecting back to myself, because I was kicked out for years.